Hey everybody, it's Rory from A&S Gear, and today we're going to learn how to do some general maintenance on your paintball markers. Alright, so we're going to do maintenance on a G5 Spec-R, which is what we have here, but this will translate over to the standard G5 as well. And a lot of the dangerous power guns will work on this general basis right here. Now obviously things will be different if you got old ones like the G4, the G3, the older Spec-Rs. Obviously they've got macro lines and different components, but the overall idea is going to be the same. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's just take the gun apart into its pieces, and then we'll work on them individually. So we'll get the reg off. The reg does break into two pieces, and sometimes it will come apart in two pieces. Like when I was unscrewing this, this upper and lower section want to come apart. But I want to show you actually how to get that apart if it doesn't just want to unscrew by itself. Alright, so let's get the frame off. Now whenever you're doing maintenance, it's just a good idea. It makes it a lot easier. It might be a little more time consuming for you, but just take your grips off. It'll make it just that much easier. You're not trying to work around your grips. You're not trying to work around half of your grips being on, flopping around. Just take them off. It's another 20 seconds out of your life. You'll be fine. Unless you only had 20 seconds, and then you can leave your grips on. Get that out of there. Now we're going to separate our frame from our body. What we want to do is make sure that our wiring is unplugged before we do that. So we've got our two sets of wires here. We have our eye wires and our power wire for our solenoid. And if you've never opened this up before and taken anything apart, then most likely these will be wire tied together. You can see them right there. They've got them all bundled nicely so that they're not just willy-nilly on the inside there. So we want to leave them connected. We don't need to pull them apart for any reason, but we want to take the bracket and pop it out. Right there. Doo-doo-doo. Now I have seen these, if you grab them and just pull them up, that you'll actually pull the entire harness out. So the harness that sits on the board will stay connected to the actual wire harness itself. And it'll come out in one solid unit. So to get away from that, inside here on the harness itself, you can see there's actual two little grooves. There's one there and there's one there. And they're on each side of the slot, or the harness here, or the socket, I guess I should say. You can get your pick in there and pull up, kind of dig it underneath and pull it up, and it'll actually bring the harness up and out without taking the port off the bottom. So there's one, and it looks like the second one you might not be able to get to. They've kind of covered it and stuff. So you can't get to the other one. This upper harness right here, the 4-pin one, is got the 2-pin one in the way, and then there's this little outcropping right here, which is where the grip screw, I think, goes through. Or, no, it's a board screw that comes from the other side. That board screw right there is what is attached to that little hole right there. So you're gonna need to be very careful when you pull this out that you don't pull the entire socket out with it. You just pull the harness itself. All right, that's out. Let's take these two frame screws, one here, and then the other one is at the top, at the back. And that will let these come apart. Make sure we don't pinch our wires. Be careful pulling them out. Now, with the frame, there's really only 2 points that you, 2 points that you can have that will leak or have a problem. This little O-ring right here. Now that is the transfer from air coming into the tank through the ASA at the bottom, coming up through the frame back here, from this hole where your O-ring is sitting right there, and into that little port right there. So if you have a leak from the rear of the frame, go ahead and check that O-ring to make sure it isn't lost or damaged right here. If you have a leak from the bottom, that's going to be your ASA. So let's go ahead and pull that apart so we can just be done with the frame in general. This is the easy way to get to your trigger right here. You can take these two screws out, boop, boop, right there, and get the trigger out. You do need to take the two side screws out as well, but that'll let you lift it up right out of the top here. And then you can mess around with it any way you want to. But the easiest way to do this, undo the lever. That'll take a little bit of pressure off of the spring. And that'll let you undo this piece on the side of the screw, and then you'll be able to pull it up and out. Now it is, even though it is open, it's still under spring tension right now. So just be careful when you pull this spring or this screw out that this doesn't shoot off and you lose the assembly that's on the inside. So I like to do it closed, and I actually will put my finger on it and push, and that will keep it from wanting to pop out. I can get a grab on it, there we go, like that. But to see if I'm letting go, that wants to pop right off of there. So I'm just going to be careful with it so it doesn't. That comes out. This O-ring that's on this plunger right here, these go bad. I've seen plenty of them break, but they're very simple to replace. And if you get a leak coming out the bottom of your ASA that is not from the back side right here, you can see that there's two holes. There's one tiny little hole there, and then there's one hole somewhere right there. If this one is leaking, that is the O-ring on your tank. If this one up here is leaking, it is the O-ring that is on this plunger right here. Now if you get a leak between the two, looks like maybe this one? Then it would be that gasket right there. So between the frame, check that gasket. Bottom of the frame, or bottom of the ASA at the back, tank O-ring, front, plunger O-ring. Pretty simple little design there. And easy to maintenance. Okie dokie. Oh, one thing I didn't show you. That spring. Maybe I did show you that spring. I don't remember. Don't lose it. It just goes on the end of the plunger there. Flip it over, put it in, put that on there. Again, I compress it down so that I'm controlling the lever. Line the hole up, put it through, and tighten it down. All right. So that's your frame. Simple, simple, simple. Let's go ahead and pull this apart. Take our eye covers off. Now under our eye cover is going to be our detent, our detent spring, and our eyes. Now these are very easy to lose because they are pretty small. They look like that. Boy, my hands are dirty. So here's our detent, and this is our detent spring right there. And if you're not careful, when you take the eye cover off, that spring will just launch out of there. If you turn the gun on its side, these will both fall out. So they're very easy to lose. So just be careful that you don't lose them. All right, let's get the other side off. Woo. I'm gonna make sure that they're clean. that they move freely inside of there. A lot of times what happens, or what I see, is these little detent cups. People run their gun, they break paint in it, or they get shot and paint gets inside of it. Whatever happens, they don't clean these little cups out. And what will happen is when the ball travels by there and it pushes the cup back, the spring is supposed to push it back down and make sure that it works as a detent. But they'll get so dirty that they'll pop out, and the spring, because there's so much paint or debris inside there, the spring can't push it back down, and then the detent stops working properly, and then you break more balls and more balls and more and more and more, and you can't figure out why. It's just because you're not taking care of your gun. So clean your gun. Rule of thumb. The eye cover is off, so let's get the eye out. Again, you'd always want to be careful with your eyes. Never force them. Pop the eye out. Just take a nice soft towel, wipe that off so that it's clean. And then don't stop there. What happens, another thing I see all the time is people say they've cleaned their eyes. So they've done this, they've pulled the eye out, they've wiped it off, and then they put it right back in. Eye's clean. That's not enough. You need to pull that out, clean the eye, and then you need to clean that hole that the eye sits over. If this thing is jammed with paint and you pull the eye out and clean it, two things are going to happen. You're going to put the eye back in and it's just going to get covered in paint again, or it can't see through the debris or paint, and the eye it causes an eye malfunction or a misread, and the gun either limits its rate of fire, goes into a default mode, or just continues to break more paint. So make sure when you clean your eye, clean the actual housing that it sits in as well. That way everything stays clean. Now for the solenoid, we're going to, I don't think that one's right. Oh, it is. We're going to pull this off. It comes out of there. Now there is two O-rings. You can actually see that they stayed on there. They won't always do that because on the body side where they're sitting right now, there isn't an actual groove for them to sit in. It's just flat body right there. The groove that the O-ring sits in is actually on the solenoid body. So be careful when you take this off that the O-rings don't stay there. You go and put this down and you forget about it and you do cleaning or whatever, and those O-rings fall off and go somewhere, and then you go to put your solenoid back on and it's going to leak. So be aware that those O-rings don't always stay on the solenoid. Now you can do solenoid maintenance, only one side of it though. They've got this side covered right here. There's two screws on here that will let you take the silver part off the red part. You don't need to do that. There's nothing on this side that is serviceable by you. You can pull the spool out of the solenoid and clean it. I'm going to try to get this apart. Typically when I do these, I have it downstairs and I have it in my vise, and it is easier to take apart. They don't just unscrew super easy. So I'm going to see if this will come apart. And if it does, then we'll be able to look at the spool. So yeah, not too hard. Pull the cap off. Now underneath the cap here is a spring. And then our spool is in there. Now this spool, I might not be able to get out from up here. You can see it down inside there. Typically a pair of needle nose, but they're going to be pretty tiny to get it out. And I don't know if I got one of those. Let me see if I can get it with this one. No, not going to get it. But you need to get a little pair of needle nose, grab that silver stem, and then pull it out. You can also you can bang it on a hard surface and get that to slide out a little bit. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to get it. It's just too deep in there right now. And these are just not tiny enough. Let me see if I can tap it one more time and get it to come out. No, it's in there nice and solid like. So you'd pull that out, you'd have a stem that's got a couple small O-rings on it, look very similar to these O-rings, just a little bit smaller, I believe. You just replace those O-rings that are on there. It's too bad, I wanted to get that out of there. Let me see if I can get a pick in there. And again, I don't want to damage anything. Last thing I want to do is put any marks on a brand new solenoid. So yeah. All right, that's where we stand with that one. But again, you can see it inside there. Just need to grab a hold of that and get it out. Replace your O-rings and you're all done. When you go back, make sure you put the spool in the proper direction. When you pull it out, you're going to see that there's one end that goes onto a spring and there's one end that doesn't look like it'll go onto a spring or that the spring will fit onto it. Make sure you put it back in the proper way. Get the cap on and then tighten it down. I'm going to give it a little bit of a snug. Not a lot, just a little bit. All right. So that's the solenoid section of the body. Now the only other stuff you have in the body is going to be your bolt. And they do something a little different with their bolt. Their bolt itself, I'm not talking about the bolt guide, but the bolt doesn't have O-rings on it. The O-rings that you would typically see on the bolt are actually on the inside of the body. So here's our bolt guide and our bolt. They go together like that. The bolt does have a bumper on it, which as long as you keep it clean, I don't think you would ever need to replace. And then there's two O-rings, one here and one here. This one is very important right here because this seals the inside of the bolt assembly. This one here is just to seal the back of the body when the cap is inside there so that air doesn't escape out the back. And then this one is for basically just when you're tightening it down, it helps snug it up on the back, but not make it to the point where it locks and it's hard to get off. So that's your bolt right there. This is the O-ring that you're really going to look at for issues with the bolt. It's either going to be this one or, and this is going to be, you're not going to be able to see these, but there's an O-ring right here. So right in front of the breech, and it goes all the way around on the inside. There's another one right behind the breech. So there's two, here and here, and they are the same size O-ring, right about there. And then there's one more back about here that is a slightly larger O-ring. So here, here, and there. Those are the three O-rings that you need to pay attention to on the inside of the body. Now those O-rings, the front two, will seal around this section of the bolt when it slides forward. Then the back one will seal around this larger section of the bolt when it slides forward. So the four O-rings that you want to pay attention to when the gun is firing, or if it's not firing, 1, 2, 3, 4, right there. Those are the ones that will cause all bolt issues. If you have a pick, well, you need to have a pick. If you're going to do maintenance on this, you have to have a pick like this. Now this one is just a dental pick, and I've kind of bent all the ends of it around to accommodate things that I like on there. I just made it a little bit bigger so it's easier to hold on to. But just to give you an idea, I don't know if you can actually see inside there. With my black shirt in the background there. You can kind of see one right there. O-ring. But I'm going to, I'm not going to be able to show you getting that out, but just to give you an idea of what it looks like. That's the one at the front, right there. That seals that surface. So the front two, the one right in front of the breech and the one right behind the breech, are relatively simple to get to and to replace. The one at the back side, which is a little bit larger, right there. See how it's way too big for that front section there. So it seals that section right there. Now these can be, again, like I said, a little tricky getting them in and out. Kind of just have to feel them around. I start with the O-ring at the bottom, and I actually put it past at an angle, drop the bottom in, and then pull the top of it back and put it into spot. So it just takes a little bit of work. It can be frustrating, but you can get it on there. All right, so that is the body right there. So really, the only thing we're left with is the regulator. These guns are pretty simple in design. Nothing too crazy fancy with them. That makes them nice to work on, nice to maintenance, because you don't have to worry about it too much. Breaking down the entire gun, switching out all the parts, is relatively simple. Just make sure, one thing I will say, make sure you are using dangerous power O-rings. The sizing on them can be a little weird, and the way that they number them is odd. If you look in your manual, you're going to see all of these like numbers describing the O-ring size, and it's not going to be like anything you're used to seeing. So I would make sure that I'm using a dangerous power O-ring rebuild kit when doing these O-rings, so that you are certain that you are putting the right O-rings in the right spot. I've seen so many times where people bring in a gun, they say, oh, I changed all the O-rings, and it doesn't work, or it's not shooting properly. And I go in there and I pull the O-rings out, and the O-rings are close, but they are not right. And I switch out the O-rings and the gun works just fine. So for a lot of guns, you can just go down to like hardware store and pick up basic O-rings and it works. I wouldn't do that for this one. Get an O-ring kit, specific dangerous power O-ring kit. They're not expensive, and service your gun. All right, regulator. So we've got a couple O-rings that you can actually see from the outside, one up here, one down here, that are going to control airflow. And so we want to make sure that we change those out if you're having a reg issue. If not, pull them off, check them out, put them back on, re-grease them, good to go. Now this will split into two sections. This one I've already opened, so it splits relatively easy, but yours might not. Or maybe you over tightened it and it doesn't want to come apart. So what you're going to do is you're going to put an Allen key in the bottom. And in the top, and you're going to just open it up. Once you get it started, you can just do it by hand. Like that. So in this top section, O-ring, 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 and we've got our piston. Grab the piston stem here, wiggle it, and pull at the same time, gently, and pull that out. Now on the inside here, that's it. There's nothing else in there. Just the piston and the spring. Spring just slides right off. Clean it, make sure it looks okay, and then check the O-ring on the piston. Make sure that it is not damaged or anything. If you get a leak out of the side, this little bleed hole right here, this is the first place that I would look. Piston O-ring. You can see that the piston, when it's inside here, is actually sitting above that. Yeah, slide that in. It sits above this hole. So if you're getting air out of this hole, it's escaping around this O-ring and it's bleeding out of this hole. So first thing to check, piston O-ring. Second thing you would check is down in the bottom, what, 90% 99% of the time, it's this O-ring right there. If you get a leak out of that side hole right there. Clean it, grease it, put it back together. Move on to the bottom. Now the bottom has a little stinker inside here. Nope. Of course, it's the one I don't pick. It's this little housing right here. It's kind of, there you go, a blue little housing. We're gonna pull that out. If that housing doesn't come out, if you can't just put it in there and turn it, do the same thing. Put your Allen key in there, this one in the bottom, and rotate to break that free and pull it up. Now this is going to have an O-ring on the outside of it right there. It's also going to have one on the inside, right? See, I'm getting this one out. Now this is very typical of a regulator to have this inner O-ring, because it needs to seal the piston stem. So the piston, even though this is usually in there, comes down through here like that. And if this just went through this piece with no O-ring inside there to seal, so it seals like this, we would get leaks all over the place. So that's why this little, I want to call it a plug, but this little housing right here holds this O-ring, so as the piston comes through it, it can seal properly inside there. So again, if you have a leaking issue and air is able to get around this O-ring and come back up this way, you still can get a leak out of here. So this can cause the problem inside of here, but that typically doesn't go bad just because it's housed inside of here and it doesn't move. The piston stem just moves through it, so it typically doesn't go bad. This piston, every time you pull the trigger, every single time, this goes ding, 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 and it moves. It jumps back and forth, every single time. So this O-ring is constantly rubbing on the inside of your regulator. So that is why that O-ring is typically the problem, not this one. Even though this piston does ride through it every time and moves every single time, the piston is moving, not the O-ring. So there's inherently its wear isn't as bad. Now at the bottom down here, you're going to see your reg adjuster. So your velocity adjustment is right through here. So I'm going to take this out. You can see that right there. This is the part I was putting my Allen key into right there. Has an O-ring, so if you get a leak out the bottom, that O-ring right there causes the problem. Switch that out for a new one. If you get an issue with your regulator where it is not recharging properly, it's slow to recharge, or it is overcharging, it's not regulating at all, it's just, your pressure is just climbing and it's bleeding out your solenoid, even though you've got your regulator maybe turned all the way off. It's the Reg Seat. That's this black part that you see right here. When the piston comes through this housing, like this, that's how it sits inside there, it pushes against this seat and it makes a seal like that. Now if this seat, the face of this seat is bad or damaged or chipped or cut or has a hole in it, your regulator will not function properly. So you cannot replace just this piece in there. You need to replace the entire adjustment piece. So get a new one of these. You can't get that out of there. Well, you might, I guess you could probably scoop it out or something, but you're just going to damage it. So you just want to replace it. Once you're done with that, replacing it, you're done. That's a whole rebuild on the regulator. Again, make sure you're using dangerous power O-rings, not just regular off-the-wall O-rings, or off the shelf, whatever you want to call it, off the wall. I think that's Vans. Let's see. So we're going to drop this down to relatively where it is. And I see that adjustment piece right there typically be damaged because people over tighten them when they're trying to reduce pressure. So when this is together, let me just put this all the way back together so I don't have to start and stop. So to reduce pressure in this regulator, you would screw that adjustment piece in. So what that does is it brings that piece up, it comes closer to the piston can't travel as far, and doesn't allow as much volume to come through, and your overall pressure will drop. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of describing it. So if you crank this thing up into this piston right here, further or harder than you need to, you'll actually drive the adjustment piece into the piston and grind it into there and cut a hole in the face of that reg seat just by over tightening it against there. When you tighten this up to reduce pressure or to zero it out, you just go until you feel slight resistance and then you stop. You do not need to crank it down and just mash it to hell and tighten it down. You just need to go to where you feel it stop. And that's it. That's where you want to be. You don't need to just overdo it. So I've seen that enough too. And that's not just with dangerous power regulators. That is with every regulator. You have a planet gun, a die gun, whatever it is, don't over tighten your regulator when you're trying to reduce pressure. You will ruin the reg seat and then have a problem. So we're going to put this in. We're going to just kind of feed this through. We're going to, needle it through there. Just be gentle. Once we get them through, I can grab my pick and I can kind of bring them up and out of the way. Make sure everything looks right. I'm going to start to line it up and put it back together. I always do it very gently when I'm just putting things together like this. Never want to force it because I can't see, and I don't have x-ray vision. I can't see inside here. So once it gets to this point right here where I can get my last look at the inside and see where my wiring is, I kind of just have to go on faith that I've done it right. But if I feel any kind of resistance where I'm trying to push this together, because I mean, you do have to put a little bit of pressure against it, and it doesn't want to go, I stop. Open it back up and look, see where my wires are, and then try again. With this one, because we have our post back here that needs to go around that O-ring inside of there, or through it, sorry, not around it, we do have to put a little bit of pressure to make sure that that post goes through. Otherwise, it'll stay just like this and it'll never go down. So I have to kind of help it a little bit. When my wiring is good, when I just leave it alone, nothing like bounces up or moves, so nothing's trying to push back against it. Just put it on, just finger tight for now. And then we're going to just do a little bit of a snug, and then re-plug in our solenoid and our eye wires. Neatly tuck our wiring in so that it's all out of the way. Regulator back on. Anytime you ever rebuild your reg, you always want to start with the pressure lower than you think it needs to be and work your way up. You never want to rebuild a regulator and then put it together with the reg full open, because you're going to run pressure in through the regulator. It's going to be too high, and then you could potentially damage your solenoid. On a gun like this, a G5 or a G5 Spec-R, there is no LPR, so you don't have to worry about a secondary pressure. All you do is just make sure that your reg is lower than it needs to be. Go ahead and gas it up, put it into dry fire mode, and start shooting. and see what it does. If it's leaking or if it is not cycling, slowly increase the pressure while pulling the trigger till it gets to the point where it shoots properly. Now, if you just increase, and it never shoots, something else is wrong. Go back and look at your regulator, open up your solenoid, look at that, change the O-rings on your bolt. So a gun like this is very easy to set pressure-wise. You don't need some special fancy gauge for it or anything like that. You just start low and work your way up, and you'll get to the point where the gun works and then achieves the desired velocity that you want. As long as it's under 300. You gain no benefits by shooting faster than 300 feet per second. So any of you kids out there, they're like, I want to shoot 350 feet per second so I can shoot faster than my friends. Does you no good. You just break paint all day long and have a terrible time. Balls won't fly straight. You have soup. You have a blender gun. All right, last screw and we are done. That's it. Spec-R maintenance right there. Like I recommended earlier, get the O-ring kits for these. It will definitely help. It'll have everything numbered on there so you don't put the wrong O-ring in the wrong spot. But G5 and G5 Spec-R maintenance. Well guys, I hope this helps you out with any questions or concerns you have about your paintball gear or products. And as always, for all your paintball needs, shop ansgear.com.